Good morning. It's nice to be back. My apologies for missing the last a few days, and thank you to Doe for covering for me. We are up to Daf Pei Tet, and we are at the top of Pei Tet Amud Aleph at the beginning of the 10th perek of Masechet Zevachim. And in this chapter, we begin with two of the better well-known concepts in Judaism. The first is tadir v'she'eno tadir kodem, the concept that when we have two items, we allow we do the one that is more frequent first if we have to choose a prioritization, and then we're going to have in a second Mishnah that we'll have later today that we go by whatever is more holy to determine which goes first. And we're going to apply both of these principles, see where they conflict, see where they're common over the course of the coming days. So let's get started. So kol hatadir mechaveru kodem eschaveru. That whatever is more frequent than something, that's going to go before the item. And obviously, we're going to now apply this to zvachim, to sacrifices. So hatamidim kodmin lemusafin. When it comes to the tamid, it goes before the musaf because you offer two tamidim every day, and a musaf is not offered even every day. Musvei Shabbos kodmin lemusvei Rosh Chodesh. A musaf for Shabbos it comes before the musaf for Rosh Chodesh because Rosh Chodesh is every month. Shabbos is every week. Every week is more frequent. So as a result, we're going to do Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh. Musvei Rosh Chodesh kodmin lemusvei Rosh Hashanah. And similarly, even though you're going to offer both a Musa for Rosh Chodesh and a Musa for Rosh Hashanah on Rosh Hashanah. When you have to determine which one comes first, we do the one for Rosh Chodesh first because there are 12 Rosh Chodesh, and of course many more of those days because some Rosh Chodesh are 2 days, so in generally roughly around 18 days of Rosh Chodesh. And whereas on the other hand, although I guess technically whether or not they would offer the Musaf on Rosh Chodesh is probably just on the one day. That would go back to past learnings when we were in Seder Moed. But in any event, the Rosh Chodesh happens certainly at least 12 times a year, and Rosh Hashanah is just once. So as a result, Rosh Chodesh would come before the Rosh Hashanah Musaf on the Rosh Chodesh of Tishrei. So Shenemar, and how do I know that all of this is the case? Milvad olas haboker asher leolas hatamid ta'asu esela. When this is a pasuk that is in discussing in Parshas Pinchas, discussing the sacrifice of the Musaf of Pesach, and in connection with that, it says that this is besides this sacrifice is beside the sacrifice that is done, the Tamid sacrifice that you're going to do, and so that implies, as Rashi says, Milvado lasa boker, top line in Rashi at the end of the line, hasuya kvar mashma, that the implication of milvado lasa boker sher la lasa tamid tasu azela, that it's implying that you already did the Ola of the Boker. So Alma, so we see Tamidim Kod Me'la Musaf, and we see that the Tamid comes before the Musaf. And so just as the Tamid comes before the Musaf, so that shows an indication of a preference for those things that come more frequently. Obviously, that's not the only way you could interpret it, but that's the way the Mishnah interprets it. So the Gemara asks, Minalan, I don't understand. Where do we know this? But then the Gemara immediately responds, Minalan, what do you mean, where do we know it? We just explicitly said the pasuk, Kedika Amar Taima, as we said in the Mishnah, we gave a reason. Milvad Olas HaBoker. We have besides the morning offering, Ola offering. So doesn't that show That's the reason. So no, Dilma Tamidin Hain Dekadmul Musaf Mishum de Tadiri. Maybe the Tamid goes before the Musaf because that's more frequent. But Musafin le Musafim Minalan. How about the rest of what we covered in our Mishnah? Meaning, how do you know to generalize this principle more, to even be across Musafin? So Rabbi Elam says, the Amar Kra Ka'ela Tasula Yom Shivas Yamim. The very next pasuk, and of course this is the Ka'ela that everybody seems to want to say together. I think it's just a almost like an earworm that gets into your mind to do Ka'ela. So anyway, so the point is that's the Ka'ela that we're talking about. So Tasula Yom Shivas Yamim. So like these, you should make for each of the 7-day period of Pesach. What does that imply? Eila Ka'ela, that these are like those. What does that mean? So Rashi tells us Ka'ela Tasu, last of the wide lines at the top of Rashi on Peitet Amud Aleph, Basar Hahu Kra, immediately after the other pasuk that we just cited, de milvad olas haboker, the tasu es ela, that right after that pasuk that we said that besides the ola of the boker, you should do these. Ksiv Ka'ela Tasu. You should do like this. Mashma Keseder Sha'amarti Lach. That just like the ordering that we just did, meaning that we're putting the frequent one before the less frequent, Ka'ela Shalmala Kashem Shitadir Kodim Kach Seder HaMusafin She'im Yom Sheyesh Beis Musafin Kigon B'Shabbos Shebetoch HaRegel Yehi Atadir Kodim. That just like this principle that we had with respect to the Korban Musaf and the Korban Tamid, where we put the one that comes frequent more first, so too in connection when we have any other situation of Musaf, we're also going to put the one that is more frequent first. One second, though. How can you tell me that the reference to Ka'ela is telling us this additional idea that not only does this principle of Tadir V'She'eno Tadir, Tadir Kodem apply to the Musaf and the Korban Tamid, but it also applies within Musafin? The word Ka'ela is needed. V'haimi Baile L'Gufe. You needed to tell us this principle itself, meaning the pasuk itself is teaching us something. There's nothing extra about the word Ka'ela, as Rashi tells us in the next Rashi, L'Gufei, it's 6 lines down in the Rashi, L'Gufei, L'Hata'in Musaf, L'Zayin Hayamim. This is what's telling us that you do the same Musaf on all 7 days. To Mikra Kama Yom Rishonhu. Because the first pasuk tells us about, the prior pasuk tells us about the Korban Musaf that's on the first day. Denafkalan. And that's what we're going to learn from to the rest of the days. So as a result, it's not extra. The Gemara says, yes, it is extra. Back into the Gemara, where we say, Im Kain. It's an abbreviation at the end of the 5th line of the Gemara. Im Kain, and 10th line on the entire page. Nichtov, now on to the 11th line. Nichtov Eile Tasulayom. We could have just said, Eila Tasulayom, that you should do these every day. Meaning the Ka'ela, the kaf at the beginning of that pasuk, is not necessary and therefore has the ability to teach us that not only do we apply Tadir V'She'ena Tadir between Musaf and Tamid, but we'll also apply it between Musaf and Musaf. Well, no, maybe not. Because of Eila Tasula Yom Shivas Yamim, if we only had the words Eila and not Ka'ela, Hava Amina, I might have thought Eila L'Shivas Hayamim, that each of these, meaning that the prior pasuk referenced 7 korbanot, 7 lambs that would be offered. So maybe what is meant is these would be offered one each day, and not that every day would get 7 separate lambs. So no, layom ksiv, because it says tasu layom, the implication is that for each day, on layom is in some ways lihayom. That the idea is that each and every day would get what was referenced in the first pasuk, namely all seven sacrifices. So again, no, it's not true that you would need the Ka'ela to teach that, and therefore the Kaf of Ka'ela can in fact tell us that just like we apply Tadir v'She'enu Tadir between Musaf and Tamid, we can apply it among the Musafim themselves. V'akasi, 1 second though, maybe again we do need the kaf in order to teach us. V'akasi ema ele layom aval shar yome lo yadana kama. Maybe if we had ele layom, we would know, okay, yes, the first day requires seven, but we don't know how many are on each of the latter days, and therefore we need ka'ela to tell us every day gets seven. Amar kra ta'asu sheyehu kol ha'asuyos shabos. No, the ta'asu is applying more generally to every day, and as a result, ta'asu tells us that every day is equal, and therefore, just as you have seven for everything. Again, the kaf of ka'ela therefore can tell us that the musaf, that just as we apply tadir v'she'enu tadir between musaf and tamid, which is what the first pasuk was telling us, ka'ela tells us that you also apply tadir v'she'enu tadir kodim when you have multiple musafim that you're talking about. So Abaye says you don't have to go to all that complicated story. Megufa dekra. We could figure it out from the pasuk itself, because im kain, if in fact we were only to do the rule with respect to tadir v'she'enu tadir with respect to the tamid, lema kra milvad olas haboker v'tishtok. The prior pasuk didn't need to say milvad olas haboker asher leolas tami tasu es ela. It could have just said milvad olas haboker. That's it. We would have known that that it needs to asher leolas hatamid. Lamali, why do I need specifically to reference the olas hatamid? It's to tell us more generally that the one that's more frequent should always come first. As Rashi tells us, we're now, if you take a look at where the Mishnah starts in Rashi, or where the Mishnah starts in the Gemara, it's 1, 2, 3, 5 lines up from there. Asher le'olas hatamid lamali. Why does it actually go away? This go for so far. The puzzle continue to say that it's referring to the olas hatamid. Pshita de olas haboker olas hatamid. It's obvious that that's what sacrifice we're talking about. Ella tala lacha. Tam hakdamasad tirut. That now this is telling us that hang the preference, the precedence of putting the tamid first is based on its tadirness. It's based on its frequency. Kadesha tilmod, so that you should learn l'shar tadirim when it comes to other things in connection with their frequency. Shiakdimo, that those things that are more frequent, they should come first. Demishum hi gufa lamali liperushe taima. That's why we're going to the details of explaining the reasoning, and so that's the purpose. And so as a result, whether you follow Abaye or otherwise, the bottom line is, or Rabbi Ilah, the bottom line is that we have good reason to say tadir v'she'enu tadir kodim. Now we're not fully done with the concept of tadir v'she'enu tadir kodim, but we need to now incorporate the second concept of whatever is more holy should go first. So let's take a look. Went back into the Gemara at the Mishnah in the middle of Pei Tet Amud Aleph. So kol hamekudash mechaveiro kodem es chaveiro. So whatever is more holy than something else should go before the something else. And now we're going to get you a list of 11, I believe. Let me just double check my math. 11 examples, and let's go through them. So example number 1. Dam chatas kodem ledam ola. The blood of a sin offering is going to be offered before the blood of an ola offering. And why? The Gemara explains what aspect of holiness. Mipnei shehu miratzeh. it provides some sort of atonement. And Rashi tells us what kind of atonement it's talking about. 4 lines down from the fourth line of where it says Mishnah in the Gemara down in Rashi. Take a look on the right hand side of the page. Shehu maratza mechaper al chayve krisos hatzarach ritzui gadol. That when it comes to the sin offering, it creates forgiveness for an atonement for something where you would be otherwise subject to kares, a very severe form of penalty, and that requires significant atonement and significant appeasement, and so as a result, that's going to go first. So and now every ola kodmin le'emure chatas, and when it comes to the offering of the limbs of the ola, they come before the burn parts of the chatas. So if you have ola limbs and chatas limbs ready to, and the chatas limbs that are being offered that are ready to go on the altar, you need to put the ola limbs first. Again, notwithstanding the fact that we had the blood of the chatas come before the blood of the ola. So it depends on what part you're talking about. And why is that? Because the ola limbs are completely eaten by the fire. And so as a result, something that's going to be completely eaten is more holy than something that's only going to be partially eaten. Chatas kodemis la'asham, when it talks about offering a sacrifice, a sin offering comes before an asham offering. Dama nitan al arba koranos, because when it comes to a sin offering, it gets put on all 4 of the corner horns of the mizbeach, the al hayesod, and it also gets put on the base of the altar, as Rashi tells us, al arba karanos. This is from the bottom of the narrow lines of Rashi. It's 6, 9, about 12 or 13 lines up. Al arba karanos, v'asham beis matana shehein arba v'lo ala karanos. And when it comes to the asham offering, it's offered 2 times on 4 different walls. We saw the machlokas in the 5th parak exactly how that happens. But the bottom line is that it's not the same 4 offerings for 4 applications of blood, and it's not on the top corner horns of the mizbeach. That's a lesser kind of situation, and therefore we do the more important item first. Va'al hayesod, as Rashi continues, next Rashi, shafichas shirayim, when it comes to the pouring out of the remnant blood. Uba asham lo matzinu shenemru. So even though we apply the concept of shirayim blood to all sacrifices that have blood applications, and therefore it all gets poured on the base. But when it comes to what the Torah actually tells us, the Torah never explicitly mentions it with respect to the asham, whereas it is explicitly mentioned with respect to the chatas, and therefore the chatas is clearly more significant from a holiness perspective. And so that is item number 3 in our list of preferences, that the chatas comes before an asham. Asham kodem letoda ve'el nazir, and asham comes before both the toda and the with the Thanksgiving offering and the ram of a nazir. That and so and why is that? Mipnei shehu kodshe kodshim, because when it comes to an asham, it is still considered part of Kodshe Kodshim. The entire sacrifice is considered Kodshe Kodshim, and therefore it gets precedence. Now, if you're wondering, what about, now let's take a look at the next item. Toda ve'el Nazir Kodmin l'shlamim. The Toda and the Nazir's ram come before a shlamim, because they are only eaten for 1 day, whereas a shlamim is eaten for 2 days and 1 night. Actually, it's 1 day and 1 night for that the Toda and the El Nazir can be eaten, and they require loaves of bread to be brought with them, whereas the shlamim can be brought without any bread. And so now, if you're wondering, well, what about the Toda and El Nazir between the 2 of them? Which of them come first? Well, thankfully, the Gemara will be looking into that question. So next item, so that's item number 5 in our list. Item number 6 in our list is Hashlamim kodlim in the that the shlomim come before a bechor. And why is that? Mishem mipnei shehein teunin matan arba, because a shlomim still requires two applications that go to all four sides. That is more than a bechor, which only requires one application. Usmicha, and the shlomim requires resting on putting your weight on the animal. Unisachim, and it requires libations. Utenufos chazev v'shok, and the waving of the breast and the thigh, which are given to the kohanim. So that shows why the shlomim is more holy than the bechor. The habechor kodem lamaser, and the bechor comes before the meiser offering. And why is that? Mibnei shekadusha so mirechem denechal kohanim, because a bechor is holy as soon as it's born, because that's a firstborn animal is by definition the firstborn animal. And so as a result, as soon as it's born, it becomes the firstborn animal and has the holiness, even though it does require explicit sanctification thereafter, but it does have already sanctification even before anyone gives it additional sanctification. And it's only eaten by Kohanim, where the Meiser, where you take all the animals that were born that year and you put them through a counter, and every 10th one goes to Hashem. So that those and is brought as a sacrifice in the Beis Hamikdash, but the person who brought it gets to eat it. That is get eaten by everybody. So the Maaseh, and again, that sanctification has to be done through accounting, and that isn't at birth. That's later. That's after after all the animals are collected at the end of the year. So as a result, that's going to have a lower level of sanctification. Hamaser kodem laofot, but the Maaser comes still before bird sacrifices. Why? Mimnei shehu zevach, because it's a sacrifice, it's a slaughtered animal. It's a bigger sacrifice than the birds. The yeshbo kodesh kodashim damo va'emurav. And you know what? It has parts of it that have a Kodesh Kodeshim aspect to it, meaning that there are parts that are going to be put on the altar, namely the blood and the sacrificial parts, and nobody is allowed to benefit from them because of their holy stature. So ha'ofos kodmin lemenachos, and bird offerings come before mincha offerings. Why? Mipneim shehem minei damim, because they still have a blood application, and blood applications are more serious than non-blood applications and things that don't have any kind of application, namely a mincha offering. Minchas chote kodem leminchas nedava, and a mincha of a sinner, somebody who sins, meaning, for example, a korban ola v'yored in connection with a sin, where we say that the poorest kind of person would offer a mincha, that's going to come before a voluntary mincha offering, mibnei shehu ba'al chet, because it comes because of a sin. And chatas ha'of, finally, the last one, a bird sin offering, kodemes la'olas ha'of, comes before the ola of a bird ola. V'chein behekdesha, and so too in connection with its consecration. So we now have a full list, or at least a somewhat full list, but we need to go through the list to understand it better. So mina hanimili. So how do I know all of this? As we turn to Pei Tet Amud Bet, and Top Rashi on Pei Tet Amud Bet explains, what are we asking? Because Minan immediately is, how do we know this? But we just said 11 different things. So which one of them are we referring to? So the one that we're referring to, Rashi tells us, Dam chatas kodem l'dam ola, right? That the blood of a sin offering comes before the blood of an ola offering. That was obviously the first of the items that we list, and so it makes a lot of sense that that would be the one that the Gemara would ask first, but thankfully Rashi confirms that that's the case. And we're going to do the second one also, and that the limbs of an ola, note that we don't refer to as a murei because it's all the limbs of the ola that are going to be put on the altar, to the limbs that are burned from the sin offering. So how do I know both of those things. So the Tanu Rabbanan, we have a brisa that deals the following, that teaches us the explanation for this, because the Torah says, and this is a pasuk in Bamidbar Perek Chet pasuk Chet. Upar sheni ven bakar tikach lechatas. This is in the discussion of the Levium becoming inaugurated as the Levium in place of the firstborn. And so the Torah says that you take a second young bull that you take as a chatas offering. So imba lemamed shehen shnayim. So why does it need to say par sheni? Meaning we already know, we can count. We had the beginning of the pasuk said, let's go. Just the whole pasuk says as follows: "V'lakchu par ben bakar umin chaso solas b'ulav hashemen upar sheni ben bakar tikach lechatas." So that's the full pasuk. But we said in the beginning there are only two parim that are mentioned here. So how could it? What else could it be referring to? So so why did it specifically need to tell us the second? So im balal ameid shehin shnayim hare kvar ne'emar va'aseh es ha'achad chatas ve'es ha'achad olah. We're going to say explicitly in four psukim later in pasuk Yud Bet, we're going to say that we're going to do one as a chatas and one as an ola. So we know how to count. 1 plus 1 equals 2. So ma Talmud lomar ufar sheni ben bakar tikach lechatas. Why are we telling us this unnecessary statement? Shiacho, because I might have thought shiahei chatas kodemis lekol maaseh ola, because I might have thought that just as here, that in general a sin offering is going to go before the ola offering. Talmud lomar upar sheni ben bakar tikach lechatas. I would have thought that generally a sin offering comes before an ola offering, because again, as we saw in the third item of our Mishnah, that in fact a chatas generally, as we see later, I guess the 11th item of our Mishnah, that a chatas ha'ov comes before an ola of a bird. So I might have thought that just as a sin offering should come before an ola offering because it provides atonement, so too we should say that generally. But now it says that the par sheni ben bakar tikach lechatas I par sheni, if the chatas is the second bull, yachol tehei ola kodemis lechatas lekol maaseh. Now I might have thought that this would mean that an ola always goes first, right? Because now originally we would have thought a sin offering goes first because it provides atonement. Now we have the pasuk that seems to suggest that the ola goes first. So maybe the ola should always go first. So Talmud lomar va'aseh es ha'achad chatas ve'es ha'achad ola. You should do the one as a chatas and the other as an ola. Now we put the chatas first. So how do we resolve this whole complicated nature? We've got one pasuk where it seems to be that the chatas goes first, one pasuk where it seems to be that the ola goes first. So what do? So haketzad. So the Gemara explains, dam chatas kodemis ledam ola mimnei shemiratza. When it comes to the atonement aspect of the sacrifice, so as a result, the blood of a chatas is going to come first before the blood of an ola because it gives the atonement. It provides the acceptance. But everei ola, but when it comes to the burning of the ola and the limbs of the ola, so then it's going to go first. So, v'amai, 1 second though, why do we say that you have to put the blood of all 4 applications of blood for the sin offering before you do any of the ola? Matana kamaisa de mechapra tiktum v'hanach lo. Why not? If we're going to say that in general an ola should go first, but only because of the atonement we're going to put the chatas first, let's do the following. We'll do the first blood application, and we'll say, okay, the first blood application goes from the chatas, and that's because it provides atonement. You now have received atonement. So let's go do everything else for the Ola first, and we'll come back to do the rest of the sin offering blood applications. But the rest of the Ola could take precedence, including the blood of the Ola before the last three applications of blood of the chatas. So as Rashi tells us, fourth line down in the narrow lines of Rashi on Pei Amabet, Matana Kamaisa, Dechatas Mechapra, that the first application of the blood of the sin offering, that already provides the atonement. Vishlama Kapara and Bedida, and it completes the kapara with it. Kida Amran beperak beishamai, as we saw back on Daf Lamechem and Aleph. V'chiper afal pi shalom nitan elachas. You get atonement even if you only did one blood application. So why not do it that way? So we're going to have two potential answers. Amar Ravina hacha b'chatas halavim askinan. You know what? Take a look at the context of the psukim that we're talking about, and remember we're in Bamidbar Parachet Pasukhet, and that's talking about the Levium, a chatas that was offered by the Levium as part of their sanctification ceremony. That's not a sin chatas, it's a transformation chatas. There's no sin that was associated with it. So va'av gaf dechi ola dami, and so even though it's comparable to an ola, in that it has nothing to do with a sin, ka'ama rachmana he tiktum, and yet nonetheless the Torah tells us that there's an aspect of precedence for it. So it's not based on the atonement alone. There's an aspect that we need to give it precedence, and that's going to be for the blood. So the fact that the blood is the atonement tells us why we should choose the blood of the chatas to be the item where we're going to give the chatas a precedence. But once we give it precedence, it's not about the atonement any longer, because the context of the pasuk that we're teaching this lesson has nothing to do with atonement, because there's no atonement necessary for the Levium as part of their inauguration. So that's answer number one. Answer number two, Ba'marava Amre, Hoil V'hitka B'matanos Gomer. Maybe this is like a simpler answer. You began the process of offering the blood of the sin offering. You made one application on one of the horns, on one of the corner horns. So why not finish the process? So that's a second reason. Okay. So to finish up for the day, we're going to offer a series of 3 inquiries concerning the rules of preference that are not directly addressed. And I think in all 3 cases, we're going to come to the conclusion that one cannot tell which to proceed. So Ibailahu, Dam Chatas ve'evrei Ola. All right, so we know that Dam Chatas comes before Dam Ola, and we know that Evarei Ola come before Emurei Chatas. But what if you have Dam Chatas and Evarei Ola? We don't know which one comes first. So Eza Mohim Kodem, which comes first? Dam Chatas Kodem Mipnei Shemiratza. Do we say that the blood comes first because it provides atonement? O Dilma or do we say, no, the burned parts of the Ola come first because it's entirely burned? Meaning, we have these 2 concepts, but now we don't know which one to do. So Tashma, we're going to try and use our Mishnah to teach us which is preferential, which should get preference. So Dam Chatas Kodem L'Dam Ola. First we say that the Dam Chatas comes before the Dam Ola. What's the implication? L'dam ola hu dekadem, le'evrei ola lo kadem. No, it only comes, dam chatas only comes before the blood of an ola. It doesn't come before the evrei of the ola. So therefore, the evrei of the ola, the limbs of the ola that are getting fully burned, that should go first. 1 second though, adarabba, miseifa, the next line, the next clause of the Mishnah, you could use the exact same logic and come to the exact opposite conclusion. Evarei ola kodmi le'emure chatas. We say that the limbs of the ola come before the sacrificial parts of the chatas. Le'emure chatas hu dekadim, ledam chatas lo kadim. And what's the implication? Yeah, they come before the sacrificial parts of the chatas, but not before the blood of the chatas. So elameha leika lamashmalina. We can't figure out which one is going to get precedence from our Mishnah. Next question. Ibailahu dam ola ve'imure chatas eze mehen kodem. So which one comes first? The blood of the ola or the emure of the chatas, right? We know the blood of the ola comes after the blood of the chatas, and we know the emure of the chatas comes after the averim of the ola. But which one of them comes first between the two? So eze mehen kodem. So dam ola kodem dekaase mikoach kalil. Do we say that the blood comes first because it is going to be from an offering where everything gets consumed on the fire? O dilma emure chatas, or do we say no? The burned parts of the chatas come first. Kodmin, they come first to ka'asi mikoach mechaber because they're part of a sacrifice that provides atonement. So tashma, maybe we can figure it out from our Mishnah. Dam chatas kodem ledam ola, that the blood of a chatas comes before the blood of an ola. Dam chatas hu dekadem dam ledamu. Maybe it's only the blood of a chatas that comes before the blood of an ola. Aval amuri chatas lo, but not the burned parts of the chatas would not come before it. No, Adarabba Miseva, you could say the exact opposite. Evrei ola kodmin le murichatas, Evrei ola hu dekadme le murichatas, aval dam ola lo, elameha leka lamashma. Now, you get the exact opposite implication by the next line, where we said that the ola limbs come before the sacrificial parts of the chatas. And so I would say, oh, maybe it's only the ola limbs that come before and not the blood of the ola. No, so as a result, you have the exact two statements that would go in opposite directions. You cannot figure out from our Mishnah which comes first between the ola blood and the chatas emurim. Okay, third question. Ibailahu dam ola v'dam asham. What about the blood of an ola and the blood of an asham? Right. So we know that the chatas comes before an asham, but what about when you have blood of both? We can't tell. Ezem hen kodem, which comes first? Do we say dam ola kodem de ka'asi mikol kalil? Do we say the blood of the ola comes first because it has an aspect that it's going to all be burnt on the altar because it comes from an ola, we're all burnt on the altar. O dilma dam asham kodem de mechaper. Or do we say no, the blood of the asham should come first because it comes from a sacrifice that provides some level of atonement? Tashma. Dam chatas kodem ledam ola. We say dam chatas comes before dam ola. Aval dam asham lo. But we don't say that. But the implication is that the dam asham does not come before it. So bedinhu di'boy lemisnei dam asham. Nah, that's not necessarily true because maybe our Mishnah really could have said that dam asham comes first. And why did we need to specifically talk about a chatas? But because of the next line of the Mishnah where we say Evirei Ola Kodmin le'emure chatas, that the Ola limbs come before the sacrificial parts of the chatas. So that specifically is talking about Ola and chatas. So as a result, we said in the first line of the Mishnah that it's also talking about chatas and Ola. But truly, maybe it's true also for Asham. And why did we need to explicitly talk about chatas and ola in the second line? If we had in our first line the blood of an asham, and in the second line the emurim of the asham, and we didn't reference chatas at all, haba amina, I might have thought le'emuri asham hu dekadme, that only when it comes to the ola limbs versus the asham sacrificial parts will the ola limbs take preference. But le'emuri chatas lo kadme, but I might think that when it comes to a comparison of the Ola limbs and the Chata sacrificial parts, maybe the Chata sacrificial parts go first. Why? Mishum haki tanacha, because they provide atonement, and so and greater atonement than an asham, and so mishum haki tanachadas, and so that's why we need to say in the second item of our Mishnah that we're talking about a chatas, and maybe because in the second item we talk about a chatas, that's why we talk about a chatas in the first item, and it has nothing to do, and it tells us nothing about Dam Asham versus Dam Ola. It tells us nothing about that comparison. And maybe really Dam Asham does go before Dam Ola. So we try again to prove our case. Tashma, come and listen. So Chatas Kodem LaAsham. A sin offering comes before an Asham. Chatas hu dekadma le la'asham. That it's specifically a sin offering that comes before an asham. Aval ola lo. Maybe we could say that an ola comes after an asham. So my lab dam, and maybe what this is talking about is in connection with blood. Lo, not necessarily. Aimurim. No, maybe the Mishnah, and meaning that when the Mishnah tells us that the Chatas comes before the Asham, it's talking about blood, and therefore, when it says that the Asham that only the blood of a Chatas comes before the blood of an Asham, but maybe not the blood of an Ola should come before the blood of an Asham. No, that's not necessarily, and so that would resolve our question of which comes first, the blood of an Asham or the blood of an Ola, and it would tell us that the blood of an Ola comes before the blood of an Asham. Lo, not necessarily. I'm sorry, and it would tell us that the blood of an Asham comes before the blood of an Ola. Lo, a'imurim. No, that's talking about the sacrificial parts, not the blood. And daikanami dekatani mibnei shedama nitan. And the reason that we can say that it's got to be referring to the sacrificial parts, namely that the sacrificial parts of a chatas come before the sacrificial parts of an asham, it's because damanita. It's because the blood is applied to four horns. And what could it have said? It should have said that it's applied to the four horns. The fact that it refers to blood and doesn't use a pronoun in order to refer to what we're talking about, that shows that we're not talking about blood, and therefore, what must we be talking about? We must be talking about the sacrificial parts. So shma mina. So in fact, in this case, we actually have figured it out. We're talking about the sacrificial parts and not the application of blood. But therefore, when it comes to our question was which comes first, Dam Ola or Dam Asham? We're left with no answer. So all three of these questions, we have no answer. So let's get a little bit further. We'll do one last little piece. Chatas kodemes. So adarabba. So we're going through all the different items. So we say that the chatas comes first. So I might have thought that it comes before an asham. So adarabba. Asham kadem shekain yesh lo kitzva. So now we're going to highlight for each of the pairs why we might have thought the opposite. And I might have thought that the asham would come first because it has a fixed minimum value where the chatas does not. So afilu haki ribuy demizbeach adav. No, because there are more significant applications of blood on the altar, that's more significant than the minimum value. Asham kodem latoda. The asham comes before the toda. Adarabah toda ve'el nazir. Kadmei came to unim lechem. I might have thought the toda and the nazir should come first because they require loaves of bread. Afilu haki kachi kachim adipik. No, even though they have bread, yes, that's important, but it's not as important as being koche kachim versus koche kalim. Toda ve'el nazir. They come before the shlamim. Because so adarabba, I might have thought they should come after shlamim. Shlamim kadmei shekain yeshno b'tzibur kibiyachid. There are communal shlamim offerings, and that should make the shlamim, as a general rule, a more significant sacrifice. No, that's not enough. The fact that it's eaten for one day and one night is better than more than 2 days and one night. So ibailahu. So now we got the question that I referenced then during when we were learning the Mishnah together. Toda el Nazir eza mehen kodem. We've grouped together the Toda and the Nazir ram. So which one comes first? So Toda kadma shekain te'una arba mine lechem. Do we say that the Toda comes first because there are 4 kinds of bread? 3 of them are matzah related. 1 of them is a leavened bread. The leavened bread is equal in weight to the unleavened breads, but there are 10 of them and 30 of the other, and 10 of each of the different kinds. But in any event, there are still 4 kinds. Odilma el nazir kodem shekain yeshimo dam macherim. Or do we say no? The el nazir should come first. The ram of the nazir should come first because it is brought with other sacrifices. Namely, there is a chatas and an ola that is brought with it. So Tashma, zu kodemis lazu. Really, the Toda comes before. How do I know that zu kodemis lazu means that? That zu kodemis lazu la'ayel le'elmina ayri b'toda ve'el nazir. That the Toda is going to come before the el nazir. So how do I know that? Shazu te'una dalin minech lechem, because the Toda requires 4 types of bread. V'zu eina te'una ela shnei lechem mini lechem, and the other one requires only 2 types of bread. So shlamim kodem lebechor. We say that the shlamim comes before the bechor. So again, adarabba, bechor kodem l'shekain kedusha somei rechem v'ne'achal kohanim. Maybe the bechor should come first before the shlamim, because after all, the bechor has its sanctity when it's born, and it's only eaten by kohanim. So afilu mitzvos yiserus adife. Nah, there are way more different mitzvos that are associated with it. Namely, you apply blood to all 4 sides. You do smicha. You do the libations. You have the waving. So all of those different things, therefore, are more than just the 2 items of the sanctity at birth and being eaten by kohanim. Ha bechor kodem. The bechor comes before the meiser. Adarabba, I might have thought the opposite. Meiser kodem shekain mekadosh lefanav v'la'akrab. When it comes to the meiser, if you mix up a bechor with something else, there's no mix-up, because we know which is the firstborn animal, and so as a result, that's the one that's sanctified. You can't just simply sanctify an animal and say this is a bechor. No, but the point is, when it comes to meiser, if you get the count wrong, if you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 10, or 10, 9, 10, and realize that you messed up, then all 3 of those last animals are going to end up being meiser. The one that's the actual 10th is meiser because it was the actual 10th. The one that came before it is because you called it 10 is going to be a meiser, and the one after it, because you called it 10 as well, is also going to be meiser, and so therefore you could end up with 3. That's stricter than the rules of bechor. No, afilu hachi kedusha mirechem adifa. Now the fact that it's from birth already sanctified, that's more significant. And finally, meiser kodem laofos. The meiser comes before the bird offerings. Adarabba, ofos kodme, shekain kodshe kodshim. They're completely consumed. They're kodshe kodshim. So I might have thought that they should take precedence. No, afilu hachi min zevach adiv. No, the fact that it's a larger animal and it's being slaughtered, and whereas the other animal, the birds, are just getting malika, no, the slaughtering is more significant. So that is why they come first. And so we will pick up with Amar Ravina, God willing, tomorrow. It's a pleasure to be back learning with you and wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.